Business Foundations for Mums with me, Kate Butcher, is the podcast to listen to if you are a mum who is ready to launch your business, not sure where to start, or wanting to turn that sideline into something more serious. It will be full of practical tips, mindset advice, and inspirational and honest interviews with mums who are juggling business and motherhood, supporting mums in business to turn your dream into a reality. And welcome to today's episode of Business Foundations for Mums. Today, I wanted to talk to you about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, I've Googled it to get a really accurate definition. I wanted to get the right definition. And there were a few definitions on Google when I looked, but the one that I related to the most, that I felt was probably the best description of what imposter syndrome is, it is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. And I thought that summed imposter syndrome up pretty accurately in terms of how I understand it, how I have experienced it, and also in the way that other people who I've spoken to about imposter syndrome have also experienced it. So imposter syndrome really is that, as it says, that inability to believe in your own abilities. It's that inability to believe that you deserve the success that you're having. It's that inability to believe in your skills and in what you do. It's that inability to believe that you really are brilliant at what you do. And no matter who tells you that you're brilliant, no matter how many times you get really good testimonials, there is still that constant niggling self-doubt that I am not good enough. I am not as good as they think I am. I'm going to get found out at some point. They're going to realize that I'm not this brilliant person that they think I am. And it doesn't matter how brilliant you are or how well known you are or how successful you are. Most women I know still suffer with exactly that same niggling imposter syndrome, self-doubt, lack of belief in themselves and in their abilities, and that their successes are deserved. And that's really evident, I think, when you look at some of the famous people who have talked openly about the fact that they have struggled with imposter syndrome. So a really famous person who talked about that, or somebody who talked about it quite notoriously, was Sheryl Sandberg. If you don't know who Sheryl Sandberg is, she was sitting at board level in Apple. She was one of the most successful women in one of the biggest companies in the world. And she was sitting in that boardroom wondering when they were going to figure out that she was sitting there and didn't deserve to be, and she felt like a complete fraud. Yet she was absolutely brilliant at what she did. She was brilliant in her role, in what she did in Apple. But she has talked in her book about the imposter syndrome and the sitting there wondering when they were going to figure out that she was just winging it and she wasn't there on deserved, credit and so on, when in reality she was. Other famous women who have talked quite openly about suffering from imposter syndrome are Maya Angelou, who, we all know how absolutely brilliant Maya Angelou is at, and the profound things that she's talked about. It's just mind-blowing to think that she has doubted herself. Another really well-known actress who has really suffered with imposter syndrome is Emma Watson, and she's openly talked about the struggles that she faced with that as well. And another person who's mentioned it, Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama has talked about, again, openly about her struggles with imposter syndrome and how she felt that she didn't deserve to be where she was. So it's really important to remember that self-sabotage is something we all struggle with. I did recently read a statistic when I was researching this episode that said that about 70% of women suffer with imposter syndrome and about 40% of men. And in my experience, I think the number of women certainly is an awful lot higher than 70%. I talk about imposter syndrome quite a lot in group settings, in networking meetings, and it's something that I've only ever once encountered one person who said that they didn't know what it was and that they had never experienced it and didn't really get it. And even then, I'm not convinced that I believe that person, because it's all very well to say that you don't believe in something or know about it, but a lot of people might cover up those feelings as well for their own confidence reasons. A lot of people don't like to be vulnerable. So I do strongly believe that the vast majority, I think probably closer to 99% of women who, in my experience, have suffered with imposter syndrome. And I think it's something that we all need to be aware of. We need to support each other with. We need to be aware of each other's struggles with imposter syndrome. And we can only be aware of it by talking about it and by letting other people know that's how we're feeling and by checking in on the other people around us and seeing if they're struggling with the same thing and to support each other and lift each other up when it comes to those struggles around self doubt. I do strongly believe that imposter syndrome is also something to do with societal expectations of women as well. Traditionally, women have been paid less money. Traditionally, and I'm talking, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were a lot less women sitting in CEO positions, in boardroom positions, in politics, in positions of authority. And that has invariably rubbed off to some extent on our worthiness, our feelings of worthiness, our questioning ourselves as to whether we're worthy to then step up into these positions. I've no doubt at all that we are as women. I've no doubt at all that women make the world go round. But it doesn't mean that those internal doubts can't hold us back and get in the way. And quite often, those internal doubts will cause self sabotage. They'll cause us to not be doing what we know that we're worthy of, to not be stepping up and taking those steps that we need to be taking to make our businesses a success. Those doubts, that questioning, who am I to do that thing? Why would people look to me as opposed to anyone else? Is that constant questioning, that constant questioning one's ability and one's suitability and whether we are the right person to do this thing. And by constantly questioning that, we're going to then have doubts. We're going to then play on those doubts. We're going to then not act on the things that we should be acting on because we're doubting ourselves. And the imposter syndrome is getting in our way and causing us to self sabotage. So, what can we do if we are struggling with self sabotage? What can we do if we're not believing those positive things that other people are saying about us? How can we start to push past it and to work through it? One of the exercises that I have come across, which I found really, really helpful, was to look at all of those inner critic voices, look at all of those negative voices that are doubting, all of those voices that are questioning our ability, to put them all down on paper, to write them all out, to journal around them. And once you've got them all written out, have a look through and see where you think that voice is coming from. Is it coming from anywhere in particular? Identifying the root of some of those doubts can be really, really helpful. And I'm sure most of us have an experience of being told by a teacher or a parent or somebody at some point in our life, you're no good at this, or you're never going to be any good at that, or whatever it might be, questioning our ability. And when other people question our ability, then it makes us question our own ability. And when we start to question our own ability in something that might have been something we might have struggled with in school. Yes, you might have really struggled with maths in school. It might not have been your favorite subject. Maybe you just really didn't get on with that teacher and you really struggled in that subject as a result. But now you're using those math skills and actually what you're doing is exactly what you need to be doing. But those niggling self-doubts and those voices from childhood and those questions that people pose to us and those doubts that others had of us when we were a child, when we hadn't developed, when we hadn't grown up, when we hadn't learnt the things we needed to learn, they're the things that get in the way and they're the voices that can continue to play in our heads. So if you can identify who those voices are, that can be a really helpful way of starting to unpick some of those negative self-beliefs. It's really, really important as well, once you've identified them, I think it's really helpful to give the imposter syndrome, to give the niggling self-doubt voices a name, a negative name, a name that makes you associate it with something, unpleasant and unkind. And what name would you give to a really unkind voice? And then whenever you hear those self-doubts, you can say, thank you very much, whoever you've named it, and ask it to just leave you in peace. Thank you very much for giving me your advice, but I'm not interested in hearing it right now. And you can move on and you can carry on and not listen to the voices that you're hearing and the negatives that you're hearing and the self doubt that you're hearing and the questioning that is getting in your way. Another thing that can be really useful is just to recognize and to acknowledge your achievements as well. So when you do have an achievement, when somebody does tell you how brilliant you are, write it all down. Keep a little book of all the really positive stuff, all the positive testimonials, all the lovely things that people have said about you and about what you do and about what you make or sell or deliver or whatever it might be. Write down all those positives and have a little book of positives. And when that imposter syndrome starts to creep in, take out your little book and read the positives. Those genuine positive comments that others have made about you can be so powerful as well. And another strategy that can be really helpful when you're talking through imposter syndrome and thinking about imposter syndrome is to talk about it with other people. By talking about it openly, by acknowledging that you're struggling with imposter syndrome, by speaking to others who have experienced it as well, it can really help you to push past those things that are holding you back. So let me know your thoughts on imposter syndrome. Is it something you've struggled with? How have you pushed past it and worked your way through that imposter syndrome? Let me know how you've got on with it and what you're struggling with. I would love to hear a little bit more. And we look forward to seeing you again for another episode with an inspiring mum in business next week. Thank you for joining us here at Business Foundations for Mums. You can find all of our episodes, show notes and blog posts at businessfoundationsformums.co.uk, and you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook.